Ladies and gentlemen, we are just days away from the T20 World Cup kicking off here in Australia in 2022. And a lot of people are asking the question, who will be in the Australian 11? So today what we're going to do, we've got the squad down here, we've got the team over here, we're going to pick the 11 we think that is going to be playing in Game 1 and sort of what we might think could happen throughout the tournament. But before we do that, if you want to know, who do I think is going to win the T20 World Cup? Well, you're going to have to wait till a little bit later on in the week. I'm going to do a full preview, rundown of all the teams in the Super 12. I'm going to be doing it with GJ Weaver, one of the other cricket YouTubers. So we're going to see what kind of previews we come up with. So stay tuned for that later in the week. But let's get stuck in here on who we think is going to make this 11 for Australia. And there's a lot of debate about who's going to be where. Is Steve Smith going to play? Do I think he should be in the team? Questions without answers, but we're going to give you some right now. So I think there's a few obvious locks in the team. Now, this isn't what I want to happen, but this is what I think is going to happen in terms of a side. So I believe we're going to have Aaron Finch up the top of the order with David Warner. So these, I think, are going to be the two guys to open the batting for Australia. I think it's a no-brainer. Obviously, Finch made runs in the practice game against India yesterday, so he looked like he was in good form. Australia fell apart yesterday. It was a bizarre sort of finish of that game, but obviously only a practice match. Warner wasn't playing. So I think they're obviously locks in at the top of the order, and I think that makes sense to a lot of people. We're then going to move to the bottom here because we think Adam Zampa 100% is going to play every one of these games in Australia. Now, we know in the last T20 World Cup, they played sort of the two spinners with Ashton Agar. If he was to play, would he fit in around this mark? But I don't know whether or not at the SCG is probably the only spin-friendly option for Australia, whether they would play Ashton Agar, but I don't think he will be picked in that first selection, especially in Australia. We know the pitches are far better for seam bowling, and that's why we don't think he's probably going to be used as a spin option too much. The next one in, I'm going to go with Josh Hazlewood in at number 10. I think he's obviously proven himself as Australia's best T20 bowler over the last couple of seasons, and he's really come out of nowhere. I think it was the IPL last year. He was rarely used in Australia's T20 format prior to the World Cup last year, and I think it was the IPL last year where he absolutely dominated, and the selectors just had to pick him on form, and he's been so consistent since at T20 format. He's a lock for me in at number 10. The other obvious one for me here is Mitchell Starc in the squad as well at number 9. I think Hazlewood and Starc are the two best limited overs bowlers for Australia. Obviously, Pat Cummins is in there as well, but I think these two specifically offer a huge different variety, and they're both good at both ends of the innings. I think Starc could be a good death bowler, and Hazlewood could also be a good death bowler for Australia. So they've got the options there if they need them, and these two are going to be key to how Australia play in this World Cup. Then it starts to get a bit tricky. We think Matthew Wade is going to slot in somewhere around 6 or 7. He's probably going to be Australia's first choice keeper over Josh Inglis down here. But I think that Matthew Wade's a lock. Now, whether he's at 6 or at 7, I think will rotate throughout this World Cup, depending on who else they pick in the side. But I'm going to start to pick some of the more questionable choices now. So for me, I'm going to finish off the top of the order now. Mitchell Marsh in there at number 3. I think he has been Australia's... he was almost like a secret weapon in the World Cup last year because he hadn't been in that great form for Australia for a long period of time. He'd always sort of been the whipping boy from the Australian community point of view of last year's World Cup in the final. Hits a 6 off his first ball, never looked back, absolutely dominated the World Cup final. He has to be in there at number 3 for sure. I think he's one of Australia's most informed batsmen as well, and he is as explosive as those top 3 there. Warner, Finch, Marsh. If any of those 3 get going in a game, Australia are going to be in a really good position to win most encounters. The next choice is hard because I really don't know which way I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to put Maxwell in here at do I want him at 4 or 5? This is the Steve Smith factor. If Smith plays, right, this is how it looks. It goes Smith, Maxwell, Stoinis, Wade. That's what it'll look like if Steve Smith plays. And he could, go down the order or up or down the order depending on what Australia need throughout a game. But it seems like the Australian selectors are just going for all-out attack in this specific World Cup, which would mean that Steve Smith, even though he had 200s off 62 balls in ODI cricket last year, is probably not going to be playing in the first choice squad. Maxwell will be at 4, Stoinis will be at 5. I think you'd have Wade then at 6, with Tim David in at 7. I think this is how the team will sort of shape up if this is going to be the case, where you've got Maxwell, Stoinis, Wade, David as your 4 batsmen. The reason I think Glenn Maxwell is a lock of those players is obviously he's got very proven bowling record as well in T20 cricket. He is exceptional with his off spin and can provide that change up if 2 spinners are required with Adam Zampa. If you're going to play Agar in the side and go with the 2 spin options, you have to lose one of these batsmen. So I think for balance in the Australian side, you need Glenn Maxwell in there because he's providing the spin option outside of Adam Zampa. Can bowl an over here or there if the seam isn't doing too much, and you go from there. Then I think the last choice obviously would be between Pat Cummins and Kane Richardson for your third specialist seamer, if you're going to go that. But remember, Australia also have Marcus Stoinis and Mitchell Marsh, these 2 guys here, who can also bowl seam up if appropriate. But I think if you're going to play this power game, you need the bowlers to back it up, and you don't want to be spending your bowlers, your batsmen's tickets too early by forcing them to bowl overs in Marsh and Stoinis. So I think this is the most likely lineup that Australia will have in its first game against New Zealand. So that would be Warner, Finch, Marsh, Maxwell, Stoinis, Wade, Tim David, and then the bowlers Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood and Zampa. I think that makes the most sense based on what we've seen in recent games from an Australian point of view. If you're going to be really harsh and you go last in, first out, David would be the one that comes out. And I think the order would change like this, where you would have Steve Smith as a floating player and probably would bat in this like 4 or 5 position, depending on what the game situation is. Like if Australia lose 2 or 3 quick wickets, I think probably if Australia lose 2 quick wickets, you'd maybe have Maxwell in, but if they lose a third, then you'd have Smith in there with Stoinis and Wade. I think the other permutation here is if you don't play Smith, because this is very confusing at this point, if you don't play Smith and you play Wade in at number 5 as almost that Steve Smith role where he's knocking it around, getting the runs, not necessarily playing that power game, but playing that game where he's like settling the innings down. We also saw that with Aaron Finch recently, where he was like down at number 5, and if you did that and you put Finch at like 4 instead of opening the batting, you'd have to push like Mitch Marsh up 1, then you put Glenn Maxwell there, and then sort of similar scenario. I think the versatility in this Australian lineup does mean that there are plenty of options that can be chosen if need be, because of the balance of this 11 and of course the all-round ability of Marsh, Stoinis and Maxwell, of course. In terms of these 4 guys that get left out, Agar, Smith, Richardson and Inglis, I think Josh Inglis is probably the one least likely to get a game of those guys. If Zampa gets injured or anything, then you play Agar. If any of the seamers get injured, then you play Richardson, or need a rest, of course. And then Steve Smith, if any of these guys go out or have a bit of a form slump or something, or that Australia lose a game dramatically because of a big collapse, that is, I think, when you see Steve Smith rocketed into the side. But anyway, I think I've chosen my 11 for Australia in this T20 World Cup. I think it's going to be Warner, Finch, Marsh, Maxwell, Stoinis, David, Wade, Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood and Zampa. Can Australia win the World Cup? Of course. Will this be the 11 to do it though? Let me know in the comments what you think your 11 of the Australian side is going to be. It is questions everywhere, queries, problems. It could happen. So anyway, thank you so much for watching today's video. Let me know your 11 down in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. And remember, later in the week, we're going to be previewing the whole World Cup. Myself, GJ Weaver, it's going to be right here. You're going to get all of the news and previews and everything to do with this World Cup. So keep it here, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.